want to talk to you right now about a fundamental threat to American democracy. It is a crisis of confidence. We always believed that we were part of a great movement of humanity itself called democracy. And that belief has always strengthened us in our purpose. The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America.
In 1979, the United States had been through a couple of bracing experiences. The war in Vietnam had ended catastrophically. Watergate had occurred. There were a cascading series of oil crises. That was a kind of a bruising period for the collective American ego.
NFL games at that time served the same purpose that they've served for many years, which is escape. What was different about that time of the late 70s going into the 80s, that it was an escape for the country. You know, the steel industry was taking a big hit at that time, and the lifelong Pittsburghers were just kind of waiting and needing something good to happen. And what was really good was the Pittsburgh Steelers.
With a stacked roster of future Hall of Famers, the Pittsburgh Steelers had won 3 championships in a 5-year span. They epitomized the dynamic NFL in the late 1970s, a league brimming with talent and showmanship.
The Super Bowl had really taken off as the premier sports event, not just in America, but in the world. You had great rivalries, you had great personalities, very distinctive styles of play. Of all the decades, the 70s was the greatest decade for pro football.
Touchdown, Los Angeles.
Every Sunday on television, the league captivated viewers across America. And for many, the game was more than just a few hours' entertainment.
Growing up in Wisconsin, it's actually in the blood. It was what you did on Sunday. You watched Packer football.
At the 4-yard line of Green Bay.
You went out and played and pretended that you were a running back for the Packers, that you were running over the Bears and the Vikings and the Lions.
We were always doing our flag football. Got a little tough out there sometimes.
It's just what we did all the time. And I grew up just assuming that I would be an NFL player someday. I just couldn't understand why I couldn't be if other guys were.
My mom isn't gonna like this, but we played tackle football with no padding or helmets out on the grass at the school. This might be the first time she's ever heard that, actually.
Living in a small community of Crockle, Missouri, which was a population of 50, and that was dogs and cats included, football was, you were king of the school if you wore a jersey. I was a captain my senior year. You were just like the mayor of the town. We won state in 1973, something that the town has never done since then. Practice was about teamwork. You depend on each other. If you had a block, if you didn't block, the running back couldn't get in there. That teamwork of sports got me interested and intrigued the military.
It is my privilege to welcome you.
Until they graduated, they didn't know where they were going to be assigned. The graduation speech, it was all about how the embassy in Iran had been overrun by students, and that the host government came in and shut everything down. The whole entire graduation speech was about that this would never be allowed to happen again. Rocky informs me, I've gotten my duties and I'm going to Iran. And I was just like, you have got to be kidding me.
When I was given my assignment to go to my first embassy, it was actually in Germany. And I was all excited about that. The Sergeant Major called me into his office 2 days before I was to leave. And he said, Sergeant Hermaning, there's been a mistake. You're not going to Germany. You've been reassigned. You're going to Tehran, Iran. And I looked at him and said, sir, where's that?
Iran was a faraway, turbulent spot on the map, little known to most Americans. But many Iranians were wary of the power of the United States.
the average Iranian, there was a great belief that the United States was manipulating events inside of Iran and had been for a long time. And there was some truth to that view. The Shah was seen as a puppet of the United States government.
Students have always been at the forefront of a struggle for democracy in Iran. We were protesting against the rule of the Shah, lack of freedom. Many of us went to jail. Several of them were executed, several of them were killed.
I have a divine command of doing what I'm doing.
The growing protest against the ruling Shah turned the capital, Tehran, into a powder keg. A volatile post for embassy staffers and a group of new Marines in autumn 1979.
I wanted to do things that you couldn't do as a tourist in the Marine Corps. They asked for volunteers to go to Tehran for 6 months. I thought, it kind of fits in. I'm a history buff. I can watch a revolution from the safety of the U.S. Embassy.
October 7th, 1979. You go in the country, we had civilian clothes on, but you're carrying a military sea bag. So we kind of stood out. The military police surrounded us that night. They had us spread all of our clothes out and lay it on the floor. They thought we were bringing weapons in.
Looked to me like there was a riot in the airport. We got in an armored van. It's hard to articulate the chaos because people weren't even obeying traffic signals. It was just a complete breakdown of society.
The young soldiers were thrust into a nation of 36 million in the midst of a violent revolution. Hundreds of thousands marched in the Tehran streets, protesting the Shah's oppressive regime.
The opposition facing him were a bunch of religious types operating mostly out of the mosques. The assumption was that the Shah was quite capable of handling this. The smart money said that he was. The smart money was wrong.
On January 16, 1979, the Shah fled Iran, replaced by the formidable Ayatollah Khomeini.
The homecoming of Ayatollah Khomeini.
We support Ayatollah Khomeini 100% from now and from on.
The revolutionary leader blamed U.S. influence for Iran's troubles, stoking the fires of anti-American sentiment. Then the Shah revealed he was dying of cancer and asked for medical treatment in the United States.
The anger about the United States and all was at a very, very high pitch, and it was clear that bringing the Shah into the United States would set something off. So Jimmy Carter had a meeting in the Oval Office with his top advisors. They went around the room. Every single one of Carter's advisors said, we really got to bring him in. We can't let the Shah just die out there. And Jimmy Carter looked around the room and he said, okay, he said, I hear what you're saying, but what are you guys going to tell me when they take our people hostage in Iran?
Being a Marine in a foreign country, everything you did, you had to do on a compound. We burned off a lot of steam by playing football.
I actually got hurt playing touch football. The day before we were captured, one of my fellow Marines took my knees out from under me and I flipped over and separated my shoulder.
Here we are playing football. You could hear the prayer going off in the loud intercom of the city. It reminded me of how far away from home you were. Little did you realize that the next day your life would be nothing but normal ever again.
Rocky worked the switchboard a lot at night. He would call me the night before he was taken hostage. There was an alarming amount of noise in the background. He just kind of blew it off and said, oh my gosh, they're at it again. It was louder than normal.
November 4th, 1979 began as just one more day with the daily demonstrations.
The thing I remember most is how loud it was. There were just thousands of people running around. Everyone was shouting. People were running up to me, shaking their fists at me, spitting at me, "Death to America."
They were probably 1.5 million, 2 million people on the streets. You could actually feel the rumble in the earth, and they were reaching through that gate. I thought they were going to just rip us to shreds.
The first thing that we heard from the communication center was thousands of Iranians coming over the walls and through the doors. Our charge said, don't use tear gas, don't do anything to provoke them. They just kept falling back and falling back.
That morning, I was in Alexandria, Virginia, in my house. I got a call from the Situation Room in the White House. They said, there's been an attack on the embassy, and the attack is going on because it was not over by any means. At that point, we had open telephone lines to Tehran, so we kept all of those phone lines open to various offices in the embassy. We were talking to people who were there. As this event was going on, one after another, these phones went silent.
We have an ancient principle of diplomatic immunity. Our embassies, they're supposed to be treated as our territory. And diplomatic immunity is a pretty sacred, profound principle in international affairs. They were revolutionaries, and they weren't listening to the law or principles. They weren't negotiating. They were just slamming it to us.
Back in Oak Creek, Wisconsin on South 20th Street that Sunday morning, people are just coming home from church in the U.S. It's then time to go into the family room and watch Packer football that Sunday afternoon.
40, 35, he's still on his feet at the 30-yard line, all the way down.
They interrupt the Packer game, which it better be big news. It was big news.
We begin now with an on-the-scene account by the one.
My recollection was being told by my mom that the embassy had been overrun by demonstrators. At the time, actually, we weren't that concerned because it had happened before. But the Iranian government had always come and dispersed the crowds. And so the anticipation was that that would happen in a few hours or at most a few days, and things would go back to normal.
My grandma called my mom and said, Barb, did you see the break-in of the Packer game? It was on the news. My mom told her, yes, I saw that, and I'm sure everything's just fine. She was not worried at all. Maybe she was more of a Packer fan than I thought. I think she thought that something happening clear around the world, even if I was peripherally involved, really couldn't be all that dramatic at that time.
I was a young reporter for a big radio station, KMPC in Los Angeles.
Okay, Alex Payne, live on the air here at KMPC.
I was covering things that I thought were pretty big. School desegregation, fires, murders.
Everything is business as usual. Shopkeepers doing their business. You hear...
Then this Iran story came.
The Iranians had fought U.S. Marine Guards for 3 hours for control of the embassy.
When I first heard about the embassy takeover, I was in the newsroom. It came over the teletype. I didn't think it was going to last that long because there had been previous demonstrations that week or the week before. So I thought it would last a few days.
As I approached the scene, there was maybe 100 demonstrators.
In the subsequent days, there were many demonstrations here in Los Angeles. Because there's a large community of Iranian Americans that live here.
The Iranian students are standing on the middle of Wilshire Boulevard.
Day after day, Iran became more important.
Some 60 Americans are now beginning their 6th day of captivity in Tehran.
So I asked if I could go over. The management at KMPC thought I was crazy. Local reporter going to cover an international event like that. So I kept bugging them every day.
I knew Alex, and he was very energetic. He had a lot of ideas. I thought he had a lot of guts.
Finally, I think out of just sheer impatience with me, they said, okay, if you can get a visa, then you can go.
I thought that he was very brave to do it, because if the diplomats are taken hostage and they're kept prisoners in violation of international law, then what can happen to the reporters?
Dorothea Moorfield learned her husband was taken hostage.
Beyond basic intelligence reports from the State Department, the hostages' families heard little about their loved ones.
What goes through your mind when you listen to the news reports about the hostages?
Fear.
I was 13 when my father got stationed to Iran.
Career diplomat Richard Moorfield was among the captives. And back home, his son Ken sought to maintain any connection he could.
I was the big football fan in the family. Having grown up in Northern Virginia, I was the Redskin fan. One of the things that I did to sort of keep in touch with my dad was I used to record NFL games on the radio on audio cassette tapes that I would send to him.
Overcast skies, temperature in the 20s, and the stadium is packed to the gills.
You'd get whichever was the game of the week on the radio.
Chased him out of bounds after a gain of a strong 5 yards.
One of the reasons I recorded the games was to have some special connection between me and my dad.
They can't get to him. He fires the pass, intercepted at the 25. He's down to the 20, the 15, the 10. He's going all the way for a touchdown.
The cassettes would remind him of me and that I'd been thinking about him.
Ran it back 75 yards for a touchdown.
The first Sunday after the embassy fell, I went to my mom and said, should I go ahead and record? And she said, yeah, because we wouldn't want to have him miss a game, you know.
Touchdown! Listen to this crowd. Listen to it.
Thanksgiving Day 1979, a national holiday that included the traditional slate of NFL games.
Earl Campbell had quite a Thanksgiving feast, gaining 196 yards and scoring 2 touchdowns.
The Lions held Walter Payton to 54 yards rushing in a 20-0 victory over the Bears. That same day, Alex Payne left Los Angeles on his way to cover the story of his career.
When I first got to Iran, I arrived at the airport and saw it festooned with posters of Khomeini and Death to America, Down with America. And young kids, teenagers with AK-47s or whatever, everyone seemed to have a gun. The only thing I knew was where I was going to stay at the Intercontinental in Tehran. I remember arriving there. I checked in, took the elevator up to my room, walked into the room, saw this big glass window that looked out into the city. I looked out. I thought, how is it that I am here, safe, and somewhere out there, there are hostages, Americans just like me, that are captive? It just didn't make sense to me.
You speak English. We had a lot of interaction with the militants at the embassy. Every day they would lecture us about why they needed the Shah back and why Carter was wrong, and that they didn't really have a problem with the American people per se. Their problem was with the American government and the wrong-headed policies of the Carter administration.
Journalists from around the world converged on Tehran to cover the unfolding hostage saga. But Alex Payne's methods were a little different.
Our own correspondent in Iran, Alex Payne, with an update on the situation at the embassy.
Crowds continue to show up at the U.S. Embassy, voicing their support for the students' takeover.
I would walk around the embassy and try to talk to the guards. In the beginning, they wouldn't talk to me. I was just a reporter, but if you go there and you sit there and you spend 2 or 3 hours sitting there, eventually someone's going to break and they talk to you.
At the embassy's heated perimeter, Payne found common ground with those Iranian students who had studied in the United States.
During those conversations, we would talk about sports, which surprised me. Many of them liked American sports. And being in the football season, football was a topic. And I talk about the NFL.
There are many people in Iran that watch American football for the mere fact that a lot of them came here, got education, and went back to Iran.
As the days wore on, they became more friendly to me. And I say, do you see this hostage? Did you see that hostage? Some of them were reluctant to talk about it. Some eventually opened up, so I could learn a little bit about what was going on.
The main embassy building, a once vibrant symbol of U.S. order and power, was now a darkened fortress guarded by armed militants and surrounded by screaming protesters. Inside, those who weren't in solitary were confined to tiny, dim rooms.
Good evening. The world today saw from some of those 52 Americans held hostage in Iran.
We didn't know that Walter Cronkite and Ted Koppel were reporting every night what was going on to the American people.
You could hear horns honking. You could hear people talking. The world was going to go on with you or without you as you sat tied to that chair. It was very lonely.
I was locked in a room with 3 other people, and we weren't allowed to talk at all, unless it was whispered while the guard went to use the restroom or something like that.
At the very beginning, everybody was scared of everybody because they held shotguns at each one of us. And you were scared of a misfire, somebody just having a bad dream and pulling a trigger and shooting someone.
They were brutal with beating, running into walls, or you blindfolded, or let you go down the stairs blindfolded.
Some of them were interrogated very intensely. A number of the hostages were herded up against the wall in a basement and put through a mock execution. They were being told by their captors that they were going to be put on trial as spies. And of course, spying had a potential death penalty attached to it.
For the prisoners, reality was sometimes as bad as their loved ones feared. With Alex Payne on the ground in Tehran, hostages' families had a tangible connection to the embassy.
Right now I have Alex Payne, our special correspondent in Tehran, on the telephone.
Information about the hostages' day-to-day activities became a focal point of Payne's reporting.
We knew when Alex was going to call, and nobody took the telephones when he was going to call, because we didn't want anything to interrupt that. That was the major story of the day, despite anything else going on.
The embassy is guarded constantly by Revolutionary Guards, the Tehran.
The poor bosses there got these phone bills of hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, we didn't care because it was the greatest story we'd ever come across.
I can tell you what the Ayatollah Khomeini says. He will not be able to control the militants holding the hostages.
I recorded several reports a day.
The embassy is surrounded by a high wall, about 8-9 feet tall.
But I also had several live call-ins a day.
Alex, if we can do this, we're going to attempt now to get Debbie Plotkin on the phone.
Some of the radio stations put the wives of the hostages or family members on the phone with me.
Alex?
Yes?
I know that you were hoping to see Jerry.
Well, so far, the militants have not given me a response to my request to see him, Debbie.
And of course, they'd say, can you tell me about my loved one? If I send you a letter, can you give it to them? People were sending me letters at the hotel, and I was just delivering a letter or two to the militants, passing it along. Late November, someone said, can I send a Christmas card?
Alex, what are you going to do with these Christmas cards?
Well, I hope to deliver them to the embassy. The students have promised me that they would distribute them among the hostages once I delivered them to the front gates.
How many of them would have 3,000 Christmas cards? Where are they sold? From all over the United States.
I think more than 3 million cards came to me here at the Hotel Intercontinental, and I delivered them to the embassy. They got something to read, they got something to look at, and I think the American people showed how much support and how much concern they have for our hostages. The hostages realize that the American people are behind them.
For homesick captives desperate for any link to the lives they knew, the Christmas cards and messages had a profound impact.
Here you were, just in your same clothes. They hadn't taken a shower. All of a sudden, they put us into this room, put the bag of mail in the middle of the room. And we're all like shocked, like, what is this? And of course, you see this mail and you're kind of like, no information had been given to us about what was happening at home. So you went at it. It's like, piranhas into a meat.
It was one of those things that we certainly appreciated, knowing that people were thinking about us. Even I, being as young as I was, I knew the significance of that.
As the days mounted, so too did Iran's image problems. With a growing outcry against hostage-taking, the ruling regime took action.
There was a notice. Copies were handed to various journalists saying the government of Iran has decided you are no longer permitted to be in the country. You must leave immediately. Failure to leave will be considered a serious offense. Some journalists decided, I'm not going to leave this story in midstream, and they were rousted by Iranian thugs and beaten up and thrown on airplanes.
I thought, oh my goodness, this is the biggest story, and now they want to kick us out? I was thinking, how can I stay? How can I stay? I thought about a visit at Christmas time by some clergymen who said the hostages talked about football and how much they miss football.
We were asked not to discuss political matters, so they discussed football.
They were quite surprised to know that Tampa Bay was in the running.
I put that together with my previous conversations about the militants liking football.
The championship of the National Football League.
The Super Bowl was after the deadline when we were supposed to leave. I thought, what if I could get them the Super Bowl? I could stay later because I had to record the Super Bowl.
It is now day 75 of captivity for the hostages in Tehran. The question for most Americans this morning, when will those hostages be released?
After the first part of the year, we were allowed to talk to each other, still tied up, but allowed to talk to each other, and we were always talking about sports and football. And certainly we knew the Super Bowl was coming up.
We got one more to get. Let's go get Pittsburgh's ass.
Super Bowl 14, pitting the defending champion Pittsburgh Steelers against the Los Angeles Rams, would be played on January 20th, 1980, at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, and broadcast by Alex Payne's station, KMPC.
Alex Payne in Tehran for News at 10.
All American journalists were ordered to leave Iran, but Alex Payne had a plan.
I went to the militants and I said, hey, you like football? We've talked. How would you like to listen to the Super Bowl? And they said, oh yeah, that's great. How do you get it? I said, my station carries the Super Bowl. He said, okay, if you can get it, we'd like it. I said, well, will you play it for the hostages? That's my condition. If you get the Super Bowl, yes, we'll play it, because we want to hear it too. Now I have to go to the Ministry of National Guidance, who gave the order to leave. I said, well, you have to leave. I said, but they told me that they want to hear the Super Bowl, and they said that I could stay. You want me to go back and tell them that you said no? He thought about it for a few seconds and said, okay, you can stay, but as soon as the Super Bowl is over, you have to leave. So everybody else was put on a plane, and I'm the only American journalist there.
Alex Payne in Tehran for News at 10.
I was the operations manager for KMPC. We got the word from Alex Payne that he was going to arrange for the Super Bowl broadcast to be played for the hostages, bring them a taste of home.
That night, I went to bed early knowing that the game was going to be played in the middle of the night in Tehran. I remember falling asleep because I was awakened by my station. And we did a test, and I had them send some voices over so I could record it.
The Rose
Rose Bowl is packed.
And the voices were actually the pregame show.
Down to two survivors, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Los Angeles Rams.
I remember sitting in my underwear on a chair, pulled up to this little coffee table, have my cassette ready, knowing that whatever I heard, hopefully the hostages would hear.
Hello, everybody, from the Rose Bowl in Pasadena for the Steelers.
I showed up at the Rose Bowl, and that's the first I knew that there was going to be an attempt to get the broadcast to the hostages.
By special arrangement, this broadcast will be heard by the hostages held in the American Embassy in Iran, and we hope that listening to this broadcast will give you some small temporary link with home. You're in our thoughts and prayers constantly.
Honor America and show our support for Americans being held hostage in Iran.
Matt Barr will kick off for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
The crowd on its feet in the Rose Bowl. Wendell Tyler tries to turn the corner, but they string him out.
It is the irresistible force and the immovable defense.
The fact that we brought a little bit of sunshine to a gloomy situation, it was a motivation for us.
Bradshaw coming back to backs. Franco Harris who catches the pitch.
The game itself, the lead changed hands 7 times.
We'd scored and they'd come back and score.
I really tried to be precise about how I was describing the game.
Call goes to McCutcheon, option pass, he throws downfield, leaping grab, touchdown, Ron Smith!
And I hope that with respect to the hostages, any description transported them for a moment
under pressure
to mentally be there and enjoy the game as if they were watching it themselves.
5-yard line. Time runs out in the third quarter.
The underdog Rams had pushed the Steelers to the brink. Then, with just under 13 minutes left, Terry Bradshaw took over.
Goes up in the pocket.
Bradshaw cranks up and he throws a 73-yard touchdown pass to John Stallworth.
And going all the way is Stallworth.
The 30, the 20, the 10, the 5, and it's a touchdown.
I had just called, in my mind, the dream catch for every receiver that's ever played the game.
And the Steelers fire right back.
For the Los Angeles Rams, who have had to battle from behind, they're trying to do it one more time. Intercepted by the Steelers, Lampert at the 15, the 20.
It's all over in Pasadena. The Pittsburgh Steelers are the champions of the National Football League for the second straight year. The end of Super Bowl 14, the final score, Pittsburgh 31, Los Angeles 19.
I got the tapes, got in a taxi, and went over to the embassy. And I'm holding them outside the gate. And I said, you promised you would play them for the hostages. And I remember slipping them through the gates, but holding on to them, making sure that he said yes. He said yes, and I let go, and he took the tapes and said, I will make sure that the hostages hear them. And he says, some of us will too.
The tapes ultimately landed in a room shared by 1 civilian and 2 Marines.
The Rose Bowl is packed.
Including Sergeant Rocky Sickman, who described the scene in his diary.
Another day gone by and another to start. Bill and I are lying on our mattress listening to Super Bowl 14. Pittsburgh Steelers versus Los Angeles Rams.
Arrangement, this broadcast will be heard by the hostages held in the American Embassy in Iran, and you're in our thoughts constantly.
Just heard the game announcer tell the listeners that the game would be recorded and then heard by the 50 hostages in Iran. It's really a great feeling knowing we're not forgotten over here.
The Pittsburgh Steelers are the champions of the National Football League.
Listening to something that you love so much, bringing back memories and how wonderful it would have been to be at home with your family, watching the game, eating a wonderful food, drinking a Budweiser.
Touchdown, Bradshaw to Swan.
For a few hours, they were transported from lonely Captivity in Tehran to a packed stadium in Pasadena and home.
I felt as a human that I was trying to do something little as giving a tape of a football game that would help them survive.
Coming up, America's team helps American hostages.
What Coach Landry didn't know is that Perot took his videotape of the Super Bowl to some of his friends in the CIA.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
The 100th day of captivity for 50 Americans in Tehran.
The fact that there were so many hostages meant that local news had their own hostage to focus on.
Marine Sergeant Paul Lewis has been held hostage in Iran since November. Townspeople in Homer declared today Paul Lewis Day. Yellow ribbons were passed out to everyone.
All these communities who were getting reports on their own local hostages responded by tying yellow ribbons around the tree in their front yard to symbolize our hope that our hostages would return home safely.
I haven't heard from my family in over 2 months. Only twice since this has started.
People have asked me many times how I made it through the time in captivity. I tell people I often would lay with my eyes closed and think about being somewhere else. Sports. For me, the Green Bay Packers.
First thing you did in a cell as a prisoner was search under anything, just to see if anything was left or any messages. Sporting news, a lot of times it was left behind in another cell.
I remember devouring that every time we got it.
Sporting news was considered by the Iranians to be free of any news content. So they would pore over these reports about the football season, first of all, to see how their teams were doing, but at the same time looking for clues about what was happening in the United States.
I used to read the sporting news to read the statistics. It was an escape to reality instead of from reality. It was something that I could get engrossed in and forget what was going on to me. Knowing that Lawrence McCutcheon gained 131 yards in a game for the Rams made it seem like more of a reality, because you could visualize this big guy coming through the line. So that helped.
The sporting news provided brief glimpses of the outside world, while behind the scenes in Washington, the Carter White House was exploring a wide range of rescue options.
A lot of ideas had been offered to us about how we could solve this thing. We tried to run down every idea, see if it would work.
One of those ideas involved a partnership bigger and bolder than Texas.
As it turns out, one of the people they asked for advice was H. Ross Perot, the Texas billionaire.
Perot had had some experience with Americans being held in Iran.
Perot had had his own employees captured in Iran during the revolution. They had been imprisoned as, quote, spies. And Perot boldly broke them out of prison. He rented a mob, literally, and in the confusion and the disorder, got his employees out to safety.
The rescue, best analogy would be like the theft of a diamond. It's something that you plan very carefully, you wait for an opportunity, and you do it.
So the Pentagon called him and said, got any ideas about the hostages? And of course, he had plenty of ideas about the hostages.
Ross Perot was very, very good friends with Tom Landry, the coach of the Dallas Cowboys. He went to Coach Landry and asked him for a videotape of the last Super Bowl run, the 1979 game between Pittsburgh and Dallas, which Dallas lost 31-35. Landry said, yeah, I'll give you the tape. What are you going to do with it? He says, I'm going to send it to the hostages over in the embassy in Tehran. And Landry thought that was a great idea. What Coach Landry didn't know is that Perot took his videotape of the Super Bowl, took it to some of his friends in the spook business, the CIA.
The games were recorded on video cassettes like this one.
The idea was that the tapes would be altered with some sort of signal.
The principle is a fairly simple one. An ordinary TV set emits a signal when it's turned on, and that can be traced electronically.
They were able to pinpoint within inches where that tape was being played. What they couldn't see was who was watching it.
Has a man open in the end zone, touchdown, drop!
I don't think that plan ever went anywhere, but it was fascinating that the Cowboys were enlisted in this effort, and The tapes were actually shipped to Iran.
He's got to be the sickest man in America.
Word of the Lone Star scheme never reached the hostages, but through the sports pages, they would learn of the dramatic move the U.S. did make.
It was actually in that publication that we learned about the rescue mission.
Today, 8 men dead, their bodies left in an Iranian desert.
I went out to the crash site to see the blackened sand from the crash and fire of the plane and the helicopter. These are dead Americans who tried to do a noble thing. Was really heart-wrenching.
Now, this was a Hail Mary, a desperate attempt to try to do something against the odds. And to do that, you had to have skill and training and luck. The luck simply didn't hold.
It was my decision to attempt the rescue operation. The responsibility is fully my own.
I think that Carter would agree with me on this. It certainly was the worst day of my life.
I was with Carter when we got that news, and he turned profoundly ashen white. That's the nightmare that he'd had, that Americans would lose their lives.
In the wake of the failed rescue attempt, both the American desperation and the hostages' isolation increased. Then came another piece of potentially devastating news.
Charles Jones was reading the sporting news, and he said, "Holy, the Shah's dead." It's like, oh, good. Now the Shah will never come back, and we'll never get out.
We immediately pound on the door, and I say, "Hey, gee, what is this? The Shah is dead." He goes, "No." The door closes, and now you sit there and you think, okay, they wanted to keep us until the Shah returns. If the Shah came, maybe there was a chance we could go home. Now the Shah's dead, and we're still here. It wasn't looking any better. It was looking worse.
Cardiac kids are at work today. First down, Cleveland 46.
Day 308 of the hostage crisis was also day 1 of the 1980 NFL season. Enthusiasm for football was dampened by the lingering saga that continued to cast a long shadow over the nation.
It was hard not to see it every day and think about it in the context of the families that were involved and how they felt about it.
The Oakland Raider offense led by Jim Plunkett.
Every day you saw something new on the hostage situation, the failed attempt to rescue them.
The mission to rescue the hostages failed.
First down, Plunkett.
Visions of them being blindfolded and led around, sitting on the floor.
Let's see how the offense has chosen to attack them here.
People around the country tying yellow ribbons to their trees at home.
I think my biggest fear when my dad was gone and there wasn't communication was that it would just go on forever. Actually, I mean, I became a little bit more of a sports fan while he was there because it was one of the few things that I could do that would just take my mind off of worst case scenario.
If the 1980 football season was an outlet for some, in Philadelphia, it was a source of optimism, as the Eagles looked like legitimate contenders.
In Philadelphia, the Eagles stood like barbarians at the gates of Rome.
The Eagles by 1980 were a team that had been built by Dick Vermeil over a period of 5 years.
Get to him, Leroy. You're going to have to be quicker than that.
Gilbert Montgomery was a running back. We had Harold Carmichael, Charlie Smith, had a good offensive line. We had a really tough football team.
The Eagles won 11 of their first 12 games, led by a disciplined defense and quarterback Ron Jaworski.
I really liked his competitive spirit, his enthusiasm and passion for the game. And he was tough. He had a very, very strong arm, and I thought if we did a real good job of coaching him, and I didn't screw up myself, he could take us to a Super Bowl.
We had a heck of a football team. The leadership we had from Dick Vermeil and that work ethic and that mentality that we had, that we're going to outwork everybody. We were intense and worked hard.
The Philadelphia Eagles are in the Super Bowl.
Across the country, Oakland was at a crossroads. After winning a Super Bowl 4 years before, the aging Raiders had missed the playoffs in 2 consecutive seasons.
'80 was kind of a rebuilding year. There were a lot of players that were on their last leg.
Quarterback Jim Plunkett epitomized their decline. The former Heisman Trophy winner and #1 draft pick found himself relegated to the bench.
Jim started out as a #2 quarterback. We traded Stabler for Pastorini, a starter for a starter, so we automatically put Pastorini as a starter.
All of a sudden, you find yourself on the bench, and you wonder why.
Jim, you've attained the goal of every college football player, winning this Heisman Trophy.
Are my skills fading? Am I not the player I used to be? Those doubts creep into you.
We went 2-3, and it was pretty dark in the Raider camp about that time. There were rumors that I was going to get fired, and they were probably pretty close to being true.
It was the 5th game of the season. We were playing Kansas City at home. Midway during the second quarter, Pastorini got hit and he broke his leg. And so Jim Plunkett came in. Jim takes us on an unbelievable run. We end up winning the division. We go 11-5. We are the first wild card team to go to the Super Bowl.
The total resurgence of the silver and black. New Orleans, here come the Raiders.
Plunkett's return and the Eagles' conquest of the NFC set up the showdown for Super Bowl 15. On November 4th, 1980, football again ceded the spotlight to politics. Ronald Reagan was elected president on the 1-year anniversary of the embassy takeover. Behind the scenes, the Carter administration was working relentlessly to negotiate the hostages' release, hopefully in time for Christmas.
I just want to send my love to all my family and say hello to all the friends and relatives, and I'm okay. Let's just hope it's over soon.
The one thing that struck me about Carter through all of it is no matter what else we were doing, he above all wanted to bring those people home safely.
The hostility toward the United States, which had focused on Jimmy Carter, was the fundamental motivation in continuing to hold hostages until Jimmy Carter left office. So Carter was defeated in November of 1980, and negotiating began in earnest with the United States government.
At that point, we'd done everything we could do, and the only question was, are they going to let the hostages out?
I remember being led down into this big room. They took the blindfold off, and they said, okay, go pick out your shoes. And in this big room, they had all of our shoes that they had taken from us in November of 1979. And I went out there, and I found my combat boots. Still had my name stamped in them, put them on. That's when I knew that we were going home.
There seemed to be the promise of freedom.
Talks with Iran were progressing, and word began to circulate that the hostages' release was imminent.
The day that they were released was a significant day to begin with. It was the inauguration day. And we said, this is going to be quite a day, because it was pretty clear that it was going to happen that day.
They put my blindfold on, I just took it back off, and then they pulled me back off the bus, and they go, well, you're going to stay. I'm going, no, I'm not. You can threaten me all you want at this point. I know I'm going home.
Actually had to walk up the stairs of the airplane. I think I got up those stairs in about 2 leaps. Each of us came through the doorway of the airplane. We saw other Americans on the plane. We had tears running down our cheeks. We were smiling. We were hugging one another.
We get to the end of the runway. The pilot starts accelerating, and the plane starts shaking, and all of a sudden it comes back down to an idle. And it's like for 444 days. I mean, I've got all my fingers, I've got my toes, but nobody will ever know what they did in screwing with us. Now it's the last day, the last minute, and we figure they're screwing with us one last time.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
Reagan took the oath of office, and within a minute after that, the plane took off.
The plane starts coming up. Nobody's saying a word. You're just sitting there. I mean, I know I had my eyes closed. My knuckles were white, just holding on, thinking that there's a bomb on the plane or a heat-seeking missile. I don't know how long it was until we hit the Turkish airspace and 2 fighters were escorting us, and we came unglued.
I remember waiting for the plane to fly in, and you know, you just had goosebumps thinking that on that plane, the Americans are coming home. After all this time, after all the ups and downs of the story, after all the hardships and the misery they suffered.
We got there very early in the morning. There's, I mean, thousands of people with signs, "Welcome home." And you have no understanding that people, you knew that people were praying for you, but you didn't know that extent.
When I first saw my dad, my biggest emotion was relief. It didn't seem real until I could see him, until I could touch him, until he was there.
Thanks! Oh, thank you so much for what you've done.
I just can't describe the moment.
What you did for us. Thank you, Alex. Sure, so glad to see you alive. It's good to be home. God bless Americans, man. They did it for us. We felt them every moment. And thanks to you, we got the message.
It's something I'll never forget.
After 444 days in captivity, the 52 Americans were headed home to be reunited with their families as honored guests at West Point's Thayer Hotel. Their return set off a national celebration.
We were in New Orleans, and after the practice, we got the word that they had been released. I think everybody in America was glued to the TV to see them walking off the plane.
It was the coolest thing I've ever seen. The fact that just 4 or 5 days prior, the hostages had been released, everybody was coming home.
I remember throughout the week wearing an eagle green hat with a yellow ribbon, free the hostages.
Amid the jubilant homecoming, the Eagles and Raiders traveled to New Orleans. It would be a Super Bowl 15 showdown at the Superdome, now adorned in a yellow ribbon of its own.
As we're driving into the parking area, I looked up and saw this huge bow on this huge dome.
And we went, wow. We understood that these people were taken away from their families, and they were doing things to provide our freedoms. And we were excited about them coming back home.
When we got in the locker room, we all had the yellow sticker on our helmet. That was very meaningful going into the game. We were playing for 2 things: the return of our people from being in a hostage situation and the Super Bowl. So as a team, we were very committed and excited about those 2 events.
When we got to West Point, I don't know, it was 20 miles or something, and the entire route was packed with people with yellow ribbons and signs.
I remember being at West Point and the Super Bowl is coming on, and I'm in my room and I'm torn. I'm literally torn between, do I want to stay in my room and watch the Super Bowl or get dressed, go downstairs and party with my family?
My boss and I wanted to watch the Super Bowl. And so we got a 6-pack of beer and went up to his room, and it was surreal, to say the least.
I'm there with my wife. I'm in the Thayer Hotel. I'm in a nice room. I think I had a cold beer sitting there, and I'm going, it's a dreamland.
It was on the TV down in the bar, and I remember just being able to reconnect again with American life. It's one of those things, you know, it's you're back home again.
What we heard in New Orleans was the only thing they wanted to do was sit down in front of a TV and watch a Super Bowl. What's more American than watching a football game on a Sunday afternoon?
Welcome to football's answer to the Mardi Gras, and for the Philadelphia Eagles and the Oakland Raiders, the agony of this.
We ask you to please rise for a moment of thanks for the safe return home of the former hostages.
You know, I've always been respectful of the national anthem, but now I think back, it it makes me get a little bit, choke up a little bit.
When we got out of captivity, we were at the pinnacle of emotion. Everyone in the U.S. knew who we were. And the Super Bowl epitomizes the absolute highest pinnacle of achievement for these players.
And Super Bowl 15 is upon us.
In a Super Bowl that reflected the prevailing spirit of redemption, the quarterback who nearly quit the game had the game of his life.
Open his branch. First down at the 36 of Philadelphia. And Plunkett opens up the bag of tricks.
First TD was set up by Rod Martin, an interception.
Philadelphia has things that they would do offensively, and I picked it up in my studies. The tight end was on my side, and he was going to take off. So I tried to get a jam on him, and when I rush back to my zone, I see the ball coming to me.
Intercepted. Rod Martin.
I dropped back, protection was good. The linebacker stepped in, filled in the hole, and that left Cliff Branch wide open.
Steps out. He looks. Over the middle. He's got it. It's caught by Cliff Branch. Touchdown Raiders!
Plunkett looked like this was his 4th or 5th Super Bowl. He was totally comfortable.
You could see the confidence, not just in him, but in the team. You could feel it.
Raiders come up to third and just about 4 now. The ball at their own 20.
We were about to sack Plunkett, and he broke outside the pocket. So he throws this little floater, and I kind of go back 2 steps, and I can feel his, the ball goes zoop. Kenny King catches it, and he is going. There ain't nobody back there.
Plunkett was at his best form. It's kind of like watching some guys just finding their rhythm. I mean, he was just right on it.
Silver and black football is king of the hill in the National Football League. Crescendo of Raider fans beginning to rise.
Jim Plunkett's 3 touchdown passes helped the Raiders become the first wild-card team ever to win the Super Bowl. That performance inspired freed hostage Don Holman to pick up the phone.
I called the operator, and I'm going, can you put me through to the locker room for the Super Bowl? So, oh, yeah, I think I can do that. And so next thing I know, hey, guys, hey, this is Jim Plunkett. And I'm going, hey, this is Don Holman. He goes, huh? I'm one of the hostages. I said, I'm just calling to congratulate. He said, well, we played this game for you, congratulations. And I'm congratulating him, because he's got a Super Bowl ring. That's pretty important stuff.
Here they are, hostages in a foreign country, and they think about me as a person, me as a football player. I inspired them in some way. That's a great feeling.
This was our finest hour. This was the finest hour in the history of the Oakland Raiders. And we want to welcome back the hostages to the United States. And the great athletes. You were magnificent out there today. You really are.
There really aren't many things in our society today that bring everybody together, that serve as the great American campfire, that everybody kind of gathers around in it and shares in it.
Football was the avenue in which a lot of people who longed to be connected, that was something they could do. I can't go to Iran, I can't go to Washington and invoke foreign policy, but football was a national stage through which people could express their support. I'm always grateful for that.
It was a wonderful way to come home. They got home in time for the Super Bowl and the big celebrations there.
52 Americans received strength through reminders of home and gave something even more powerful in return.
Until you've had that taken away from you, that freedom of being able to watch football, just toss a football, just walking outside and just being locked in a room, do you understand how how precious freedom is.
So all of a sudden you see all this patriotism, and people shaking your hands, and it's overwhelming because you're going, I didn't do anything other than survive.
I think they're heroes. They persevered, but more than that, they really taught us a higher level of citizenship, of public service. I think the whole world was proud of them.
My feelings, I don't know if I'll ever be able to explain how I feel about you people. I just feel so overwhelmed. And you guys, everyone today, it's the happiest day of my life, and you just overjoyed. I love you all. Love you all.